horsepower Volkswagen Beetle engine. I've already cleaned and prepped the case, made sure to take it to the parts cleaner, get off 60-some years worth of grime. All the case mating surfaces have been cleaned and prepped. They're good to go. Blew out all the oil galleys, so this thing is prime time. Next thing I'm working on is the crankshaft, so let's go take a look at that. All right, so I've already done the first connecting rod. Pulled off all the crank gears, cleaned those surfaces really well. I just replaced the bearing in this after using some plastic gauge. I might pop that picture up here on what that looked like, but it measured out at 0.001, which is really good. You want about 1,000th to 3,000ths of clearance for the oil, and it measured out at the very low end of that. Standard spec is in that range. It's considered out of spec really at 9,000ths. At that point it's toast and you need to start over. I was very lucky. This crankshaft is in excellent condition. I did not even polish the journals at all. I am literally swapping the bearings, swapping the gears, and throwing it back in. So I got fortunate on this one. Another engine I have, not so much. But let's continue here and see what else is going on. Now I took a moment to do my future self a favor, and I marked each one of these connecting rods in their correct orientation. After a certain year, I believe they started throwing these little marks on there. They go up in the engine when you're orienting the connecting rods into the case half. They go up. So you want to make sure you don't get them upside down, because that does matter. They will not fit correctly if you put them upside down. I went ahead and also marked which cylinder they correspond to. And it's a little weird because, you know, it might seem like it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but as we know, Volkswagen did not follow a odd and even numbering convention on their banks. So 3 is back here in the back, 1 right there, 4 in the middle, and 2 up here. The 2 crankcase halves are offset slightly. As you can see here, how far back that cylinder opening is versus how far back, or actually how far forward this one is. And that corresponds to 3 and 1. So that's how those are oriented. I went ahead and did that just in case, so I didn't accidentally get stuff confused. Not that it really matters that much. I'm gonna measure every single one of these anyway, but I like to put things back exactly where they came from. So, all right, the next thing I'm gonna do is pop off number 4 connecting rod. I'm just using a impact very gently. Now I'm taking apart something that's never been taken apart, so it's kind of cool. This is all original, down to the bolts, stamped, Comax with a VW logo on it. That's neat. Let me turn off my music. All right, I forgot I had my radio on. Dealt with that. Now these all had minimal play, so I'm really confident that they're all gonna check out just fine. The bearing surfaces look really good. There's no evidence of any really major scoring or anything that occurred. So I'm pretty happy about that. You know, it could be a lot worse. My other engine that is actually the numbers matching engine in my vehicle, which will get rebuilt at some point, is going to require some machining, and that's for another day. We're going to get this motor put together right, and it's going to give me several years, I'm certain, of really good service. Yeah, these all look pretty good. I mean, even down into the bearing surfaces here, those are good. And the journals on the crank all look good. There's no scoring. There's no, there's nothing that indicates anything's out of round. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now the bearings, they only go in one way. This little tab here will make sure of that. Just get it seated and you're good to go. Same on the other side. The old one. Get that guy oriented in there. Like so. Next thing we're going to do is dry the oil off these threads. The Bentley manual says you are supposed to get fresh connecting rod bolts. I am not doing that. I hope I don't regret doing that, but I figure these things have been in here for how long and they're just fine. I almost trust 60-some-year-old German steel more than 2026 Chinesium. So, all right, so the next thing we're going to do is check bearing clearance with Plastigauge. So I'm going to cut off just a little piece here. Now what I did, you probably are having a hard time seeing that, but I just cut off a little bit, not a lot. And I'm going to lay it transversely across the bearing surface there, okay? Just like that. And then we're going to reassemble. Now there's two important torque specs to remember. This is a 63, so the torque spec for a 63 is 32 foot-pounds plus or minus 3 foot-pounds, give or take. The later models, 65 and up, their torque spec is 21 foot-pounds. So I'm not sure exactly what the difference is because this looks the same to me. Both engines I've taken apart. I'm not really sure what changed there, but regardless, that is the spec. So I'm going to torque these down to 32 foot-pounds. Actually, I'm torquing them down to 34 because I'm using a deep well socket here and it's an old torque wrench. Let me just get my tool here to help hold it. All right. That's close. We'll get this side close. Now, some guys have the special bench attachment to hold this. I did not invest in that, so I'm doing it the hard way. All right. Use the crankshaft to my advantage here. There we go. All right. Now, let's give that a couple taps. Just trying to eliminate any preload. That way we can get an accurate measurement. I'll just check torque one more time. That's good. And that's good. Now we'll zip it off. Okay. All right, I had a little bit of oil still on the journal there. I thought I wiped it thoroughly, but I did not. And it actually disrupted, unfortunately it disrupted my plastic gauge enough when I went to go wipe it off. That's going to make it hard to see it here. But it's measuring out the same as the one before it. If you see what's left of it there, and then we just hold that right up to it, it's hard to get it on camera, but it is matching 1/1000th of an inch, which is fine. Now we just do the last two the same way. So I will put this back on. I'm going to give it a little bit of assembly lube it on up. There we go. You don't want that going in dry. That's very bad. I've learned in this life there are more things that should go in lubricated than not. So we will make sure that's nice and lubricated. I'm going to throw a little bit here. Throw a little bit here on that. Put a little more on. I'm using assembly lube. It is thick enough to stay in place, but not so thick that it'll drastically mess up a torque specification. Plus I'm not putting that much on. But if you were to use something that didn't have quite the squish to it, that could be a problem. All right, let's get this guy in there. Now, I'm really glad that I marked all of these. It has made my life easier. I know that the number is supposed to face me, so I can't put it on backwards. It's about as idiot-proof as I can get it, and I will test that. Okay. It doesn't hurt to pop something off if it looks suspect and just check it one more time. I have learned many times over the years that it's real easy to armchair quarterback that on a Monday morning and wonder if you put it together right on Sunday night. So we will not wonder, we will know. Okay. Try to use the tip here to my advantage. Get it close. Use the crankshaft here as leverage. I can push against this way. If I have to do this a whole bunch more times, I'm going to invest in that bench attachment because this is a lot harder without it. All right. Now, let's just eliminate any preload that might be on here. Just in case. Chuck check it one more time. And again, that torque spec is 32 plus or minus 3. I went to 34 because my torque wrench here is old and I'm using a deep well socket. It probably is ending up pretty close to 32 though, because I did test it and I did not have to recalibrate it. I was surprised. But one more foot-pound is not going to hurt. All right, so that's it. Now we're just going to do 1 and 3 the same way. So I'll check back in a little while. All right, so I wanted to take a moment and just go over the plastic gauge measurement, because the last one I messed up when I wiped it off with my thumb, as I stated. But plastic gauge is real simple. There's just a little piece of plastic, okay? You can see it right here. You cut off a little piece, lay it transversely across the bearing, torque it down, and then take a measurement. And the squish is what you're measuring. Now in this case, my first one, the first two actually measured 1/1000th of an inch clearance, which is actually ideal and the minimum spec you should have for oil clearance on this rod bearing. This one is measuring a little bigger. It's measuring at 1.5 thousandths. So 1.5 thousandths is still fine. Spec was 1/1000th to just about 3 thousandths. So we're well within range, and there's plenty of life still left in that. So there we go. That's what it should look like. All right, I finally got smart. Switched over to a shallow 14 millimeter. These are 14 millimeter, by the way, and they're like one of, I think, 2 things on the entire car that are 14 mil. So switched over to a shallower socket, so it'll be a little bit easier. Get rid of a little preload. Good to go. All right, so a couple things I noticed. One, someone has been in here before me, because this is an aftermarket, albeit German, this is an aftermarket connecting rod. Now, the reason I noticed that is because the clearance around, I don't know if you can see it there, the clearance around the bolt is much smaller, and I had to switch to a thin wall socket to be able to deal with this. I'm sure that it meets spec. I'm not going to sit here and weigh this. The engine actually ran pretty good. It didn't run out of balance or anything. So I'm just going to take it as this is probably in spec and about the same weight within reasonable tolerances of the rest of these connecting rods. So just thought I'd point that out. Number 2 is it probably didn't show up on the video, but when I'm coming in here, I'm getting my finger way down in there, and I'm working a little bit of lube up on the side around the journals. It doesn't need to be Saturday night orgy level here, but we do need to get on there around the edges, because that is going to save your metal surfaces for the first few seconds this engine's running. I'm also, which I think is important to note, I'm also going to dump some oil over all of these before I put the 2 halves together. So all of the internal surfaces will get coated with some oil before I put the 2 halves together. This is just for good measure here. All right, all the rod bearings are done, so we're just going to give these guys a little spin here, make sure nothing's binding, move all that assembly lube around, get it nice and evenly distributed. Those feel great. This lower one here, it's not too tight, but it is a little bit tighter. And that'll be fine. It was still within spec. I'm okay with that. It wasn't like so tight that it wasn't measurable. It came back at the bare minimum of the normal range, which is fine. I'd rather have it be there than, you don't want it to be too tight, but you also don't want it to be too loose either. I mean, if it's too tight, you're gonna risk, well, too tight or too loose, either way, you'll risk spinning a bearing and having to come back in here again, and you don't want that. But this is all good. That's some thick assembly lube in there. It's real. Once these things get lubricated with oil and broken in a little bit, they will be just fine. So there we go. Only thing left to do on the crank really is put the gears on, which I'm gonna do next. All right guys, well this would not go on without a shop press. I tried heating it, nope. So ran it up here to the shop, good to go. A little bit of heat too. Great. So I've gotten the crank bearings, the crankshaft is done, the crank bearings are in, gears are set, all that's good. I want to talk about positioning for a minute. Each one of these bearings has an alignment pin that indexes that bearing in the proper location on the crankcase journal. And if you put that around backwards, you're not going to have that sucker in the right place. And while it might work okay, maybe, it's probably not, and here's why. These bearings have oil holes drilled in them so that you can lubricate that crankcase or that crankshaft journal. This one is in the middle, the hole. This one won't even fit if you put it in wrong. But my point is, this one might fit. It might. You'll realize later it doesn't really, but it might look like it fits. Except you're going to be starving that bearing of oil flow. And you're going to be starving the galley through which oil flows back down into the crankcase. You don't want to do that. So that little relief is cut there to allow some oil to flow around. So it's important that the alignment pins, which on each one of these bearings are offset from center in the direction of the flywheel or the thrust bearing number 1, which is this guy. So make sure when you put them on, they're all situated towards the flywheel, off center. There's only one split bearing unless you have the optional cold weather climate steel capped bearings, which are split in other places. I know that one is one of them, but this is the only split bearing, and it also has an alignment pin. So when you put that in there, make sure you've aligned. I mean, it'd be really obvious if it's not aligned right, but nevertheless, it's important to note that. All right, so assembling the cam requires attaching this cam gear, and it's really important to make sure that it's aligned correctly. The way you do that is by putting the timing mark at 12 o'clock and the lobe for cylinder 1 at 6 o'clock. Okay? Then What I did was I put red Loctite on all three of these, and then I torqued it down, the red Loctite, and then I torqued it down with my torque wrench to 20 foot-pounds. Spec is anywhere between 18 and 20. I went just a little more on that. Probably could go even a little more, but I didn't want to risk it because it is cast, so and not that deep, but nonetheless, they're installed. There's two ways to be able to torque these bolts down. I'm really fortunate enough to have this Wilton vise. Soft jaws, I'm not going to mar up this. I don't have it torqued that tight, and I even put a rag in there for good measure, and I was able to torque those down just fine. I didn't want to forget, so that's why I did it this way. You can also do it in the engine once the cam and crank are mated together and the two halves are put together. You can also torque it then. That allows you to immobilize those two with the flywheel and get a good torque on it. I elected not to do that because I could do it this way. All right, let's continue to talk about the main bearing orientation and the alignment pins. First off, if you're splitting your case with the intention of cleaning it really thoroughly, which I have, it would behoove you to remove these little alignment pins. There's 4 of them in the left half, and I believe there's 1 of them in the right half for the other half of this split bearing. It would behoove you to remove those, even if you think they're tight, because they're probably not. And inevitably one of them will fall out somewhere and you will be having a very bad day. So pull them out, clean the case real good, put them back in. This bearing here, this should fit pretty tight. It should fit pretty snug if your case is in spec, okay? Now, I aligned it with the pin back here. I got it seated most of the way. And then I took this very light dead blow hammer and just tapped it down. You also want it to be straight up and down. Don't have it be a little crooked. You know, you want it to be flush with each side of the case half there. If it's a little crooked, just give it a little tap until it's not. When you put your crankcase in and you torque the case halves together, that will come into alignment. But I believe in life that it's important to be neat and accurate in all things, so that's why I do it that way. Next step will be to throw the crank in, and then we'll move on to the lifters and cam. Okay, now before we install this guy in the case, let's talk a little bit about what's going on. Gears are done. Had to press them on, as I discussed earlier, with a 25-ton shop press. I'm sure not all gears are that way. This particular gear had such a tight tolerance that I could not heat it enough to get it on without a press. The Bentley manual discusses using a press, and I was fine with using the press. I don't think it hurts anything. There's no way I could have heated this up. Distributor drive gear, yeah, that was no problem. Brass is soft, it expands really, really fast, no problem. But this steel cam gear would not go on without a press. And we even torched it to get it on here. Me and a buddy took it to the shop, put it on the press, torched it to get it hot, still had to press it on, and it was working the press pretty good. Before I switched to putting this thing in the case though, I wanted to go ahead and talk about the oil slinger and the key for the pulley. I could have used my old ones, they were just fine, but I elected to use the new stuff since I bought it. This slinger really only fits one way. It is dished or convex in the direction of the flywheel. So as we've discussed with the alignment pins and everything else, everything orients off the flywheel. So this is dished or cupped so that it points towards the flywheel. And it can't go on any other way because this Woodruff key kind of sneaks up in to that dished area. If you had it on backwards, you wouldn't even be able to get the key on. All right, next step is to get the crank in. I've got the case oriented here with 3 and 4 aimed down. So the rods for 3 and 4 are gonna aim down when I pick it up. I'm gonna be mindful of the alignment pin position, which I've already roughly put the bearings in that orientation so that when they drop in, I don't have to spin them a whole bunch of times. I've lubricated everything with a light coat of oil, except for that bearing. I did put some assembly lube on that thick bearing half, so we're ready to assemble the crankshaft in the case. All right, I'm gonna drop it down in there like that. Okay. Now, it is going to take a little effort. I just want to find the pins, okay? Because if you start getting this one seated all the way, you're never going to get that one seated. And you're surely not going to get that one seated, because the whole crankshaft will be tilted. So we just want to find the alignment pins. This one got spun around a little bit more than it should have. Okay. And this one here, bearing number 4, has that really important cutout that we discussed. Okay, so I paused for a minute so that I could get some light, because I realized that my video was super dark. I wanted to talk a minute about getting this thing in place. Each one of these bearings with those alignment pins requires it to be exactly in the right place. Now, when you're putting it together, because there's a tiny chamfer on the top of that dowel, and there's a little bit of chamfer, I think, if I recall correctly, in the alignment hole for that bearing, there's a tendency to have it in the ballpark, but you still have some play. And you got to kind of figure out where the boundaries are a little bit, work it back and forth until you get it in the center, and it'll drop in. Now, if it doesn't, you can always, if it's super tight, maybe you had it machined and it's just slightly off, whatever, you can give it just a tiny tap. Support the case, don't break the damn thing off. Just give it a little tap to seat it. Now, I didn't have to do that because once they were aligned correctly, they went in. And there is no play, none. That bearing right there was slapping around in my case before because the alignment pin hole had been hogged out, and it was quite loud. That thing is tight as can be now. So we're good to go. Oil slinger's in place. Again, re-emphasizing the cut on that bearing right there points towards the flywheel. All roads lead to the flywheel in this engine. So that's where we're at. Slinger's in, good to go. Key's good to go. Next step is going to be putting in the lifters and ultimately the cam. All right, so I took the liberty of soaking all of my lifters and bearings as well in some oil for the last 24 hours. Make sure that those little holes get full, but you don't want them to be super dry when they're going in. So I did that. Next step is going to be to throw some assembly lube down in those lifter holes and put some lifters in. All right, I've got a little drip tray here just in case I don't want to make a big mess in my shop floor. My shop is messy enough as it is. All right, now these, I'm going to be somewhat liberal applying this around the edge, knowing that a good amount of this is probably just going to get pushed out the bottom. These lifters are pretty tight in there. They are riding on the case surface itself, and even after all these years, those holes are still really good, really true. The lifters fit like they should. There's no slop. They're not too tight. I already checked that too. But anyway, just putting some assembly lube down in here. I'm gonna kind of run it with my pinky. My other appendage was a little too big. There we go. All right. Now for the lifters, these things have been soaking. They are plenty wet. So they are good to go right on in. I do a little twist as I'm putting it in. Seat it up and down a few times. That's good. Same thing, just being liberal. It's so wet, it's not really even sticking to it. Put it in, twist, yep. Up and down, feels good. Rinse and repeat. Because these are so wet from the oil, I'm probably not even going to use the assembly lube on the other half because it's just slipping all over like a slip and slide. All right. Slip and slide, not a slip inside. That's a different thing. All right. We are good to go there. Now, what I'm going to do is get some of this excess oil off on these cam bearing surfaces. Now the cam, interestingly enough, rides on the case as well. I was really surprised the first time I took one of these apart, and I think this is my third time doing this. I was surprised there was no bearing for the cam. You can certainly bore it out and put one in, but mine were true. I test fit the new one. It was a nice fit. So I was happy about that. Trying not to get it down in that galley. I don't want to do that. I don't want to pack that thing full of assembly lube, even though it will not be an issue. I'm not putting that much in, nevertheless. That was a clean screwdriver. I just wiped it off camera. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some assembly lube to the top of the lifters, or as Germany called it, cam followers. All right. This next step is one of the most important steps that you will take when assembling this engine, and that is making sure that you have the timing gear oriented correctly. Now, I'm gonna zoom in for a minute. I highlighted it so it's visible on camera. There are two timing marks here. I've already put the crankshaft in the orientation where it needs to go. Those two marks are going to sit on either side of another mark that is on the cam gear. Focus right here. So they're going to go on either side of that. Yellow paint made it easy to see on camera, made it easier for this old guy to see it too. That way when I put it together, there's no doubt. Now, keeping with our theme of lubrication and lubricating shafts and everything, we are going to wipe the storage grease off of this thing here. Get it all nice and clean. All right. We're going to apply assembly lube to each one of these surfaces. We're going to apply it. There's 3 places where the cam rides. We are going to be generous with this. There we go. This is a Scat C20 cam, by the way. Two really popular performance mods in the 40 horse world is camshaft and big bore kit. Big bore kit is also going on here. And that will be a really interesting project to come to fruition, because I've been waiting on this for a long time to see just how good that is. So we're gonna take that timing mark and we're gonna situate that tooth right there between the other two. And then we're gonna drop that cam right in, just like that. All right, next thing I wanna do is I wanna get these gears ready to mesh with each other permanently. So we're gonna take some more assembly lube and we are going to pack these gears liberally with assembly lube. They will get soaked once I fill this thing, but I don't want to risk any dry rotations while I have this thing apart, even though being careful, that probably won't really be a problem. We are going to still do it this way anyway. I should have done this before I put the gear in, but that's okay. I'm always learning. I'm not professing to be the expert of all things here. Let's go ahead and rotate this. Now, another thing to keep in mind, if you've left that distributor drive in, which I highly recommend you don't do that, ask me how I know, then you're going to risk chewing up that distributor drive gear. You know, the steel gear on that distributor drive is more harder than that brass, and as such it will strip all of those gears, and you will not be happy, and you'll wish you hadn't done that, and then you're gonna either have to tear things back apart, or you're gonna run it and then question yourself for the rest of your life if that was a good decision. So my recommendation is pull it out, break the little plastic fuel pump rod guide, because those inevitably will not come out without breaking, at least not the factory ones. Go ahead and take that out. That way you can properly index the distributor drive when that time comes. And we'll discuss that when that step comes in our project here. We're going to go ahead and keep turning this guy around. Continue lubricating gears. Be mindful of your case surfaces, those rods. You don't want banging around too much on your case surfaces or inside of your cylinder holes there. Those do need to fit tight. Like I said, I'm being liberal with this. I am packing these gears pretty good. And my intent is to run the engine for just a little while and then do an oil change to get all this junk out, along with whatever shavings inevitably were still in there or are produced from initial startup. You know, there's a lot of new metal in here, so there will be some. Okay, we're almost there. We've now come full circle. I'm packing that with grease. That'll be a nice clean first start. And I'm just being real fastidious here with the amount of lube. It's not that expensive compared to parts that I've put in this. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and just throw some on these lobes for good measure. Even though there's plenty of oil that will get on them, doesn't hurt. Won't hurt a thing. All right. So that's it. Cam is in. The next step here is going to be to continue with putting the two halves together. And that is going to involve cleaning off again, because now I've gotten stuff all over it. It's going to involve cleaning off the case halves really well and applying the appropriate sealer. When these were made at the factory, they used some sort of a shellac gasket maker to seal the two halves together. I can't speak as to whether that worked terribly well, because Volkswagens from day one have joked, owners have joked about how leaky they are, but I'm using aviation gasket material, which is essentially an anaerobic gasket maker. And when the two halves come together in the absence of oxygen, it will dry, not completely hard. It will get a little gummy, but it'll dry and produce a really good seal. So just getting all my assembly lube and oil that I spilled on that off. First, with a rag, I will go back over it with some cleaner, make sure I get all that off, have it completely dry. All right, so we'll reconvene here in a minute. All right, so I have just spent some time cleaning the case. I am using denatured alcohol. You could use mineral spirits. You could use a wide range of things. This happens to be the jug that was within eyesight and right near, so I grabbed it and it works really good. Just be careful not to use something that would be caustic on magnesium and you'll be safe. And no, I don't know what that list of things is. But yeah, that's cleaning off just fine. All right, so I've got the other case half here. That needs to have some prep work done. I have not prepped it yet, other than taking it to the parts tank and cleaning it out thoroughly. So the next step is going to be to make sure that we prep that mating surface adequately. We don't want to forget about that. So what I've got here is just a little tool, real cheap on Amazon. You can get it for like $10. You can even get them in a couple different sizes. This one's just big enough for this job. It would have been nice to have had the next size up. Nonetheless, I'm just running it over real quick, getting off any of that residue from the last time this thing was open, which was me about a year and a half ago. Just scraping off any of that old aviation sealer. And it's hard to see it on camera, but it is still relatively sticky. It has not fully hardened, which might be why people like this so much. You know, if it gets hard, that might not seal as well over the long term as something that stays a little stickier. So Anyway, I'm going to continue cleaning this off. There's no reason to watch me do that, and I'll come back after I've got the surface done. All right, I have just finished scraping off and blowing out the case. Didn't figure anybody needed to see that. I am getting ready to just do another quick wipe down. I already wiped it down once, but I just blew it off, so I'm going to wipe it down one more time. I had this engine apart trying to solve this problem, or at least figure out what the heck was going on, about a year ago. And so I resealed it with the same aviation fluid that I'm about to put in there. I just saw another piece of trash fall down in. It's good stuff, but it can be really messy, and it gets in every bolt hole if you're not careful. All right, let me see what trash dropped in here. Right there. Got it. All right. Now what I'm going to do with the aviation stuff is I'm going to put that on the other half here, and I'm going to put a light coat on this half just in case I accidentally miss one. But I'm going to put it on this half last. First thing I'm going to do is go in here. Remember the alignment pin? Told you don't put it in there until you're ready. It's a tight fit, but that one fell out on me in the parts cleaner. So I decided all of them should probably get taken out at some point, just to be safe. All right, next thing we're going to do, I'm just going to very lightly oil that so that the new bearing goes in without a hitch. The dowel is oriented to the back. We are going to put it in symmetrically. I have found it, the dowel pin. There we go. The bearing is seated. I'm going to wipe off the oil that I just stupidly got on there, even though that's not a sealing surface per se. It is and it isn't. I'm still going to put a little bit of gasket maker on it because of that hole where the stud goes through. All right. That bearing is set. Now I'm going to do the lifters. Same as before. We are going to lubricate these lifter channels here. This time I'm not going to put any on the lifter itself. They are still soaked in oil, and I have more than enough inside of these runners for the lifters here, so I'm just going to drop them in place. But I am going to take a rag, put underneath, try to catch anything that might run out. I don't want this to get too messy. There we go. I want these to stay in when the case halves are married together. So I'm pushing them all the way in until I feel a little bit of a click. And hopefully the tackiness of the assembly lube that I put in there will help hold them. All they have to do is just hold until the two halves are put together. All right, next step is going to be to run around and put some sealer on. You don't want to orient this that way in the case because it could allow the cam to contact that, and we don't want that. We're going to put the open side in. So what I'm going to do is actually install this in the other half of the case, so there's one less thing that could fall off while I'm moving it, and put the copper around it. We'll do that here in a moment. And we're just going to come along and lightly paint this surface. It does not need to be very thick. These cases were machined really well actually from the factory, so they don't take a whole lot. You don't have to like goop it on there. Just real thin, even coat. Anything that's it will squirt out if it needs to go somewhere. But there's no reason to be excessive, but it will squish out. And like I said earlier, I am going to put some on these surfaces here because essentially they do seal, but it's also going to keep everything in the same plane. Or not the same plane, but the same amount of contact will be made. This stuff will squish out to the point that it'll get super thin if it doesn't need to be there, so why not just do it for good measure? So I'm gonna go ahead and just finish that off. This is good stuff, and you don't, I mean, it's a little pricey, but you don't use a lot either, so it lasts forever. This is great for thin paper gaskets. That are, you know, not something you're going to take off in a few thousand miles, but something that's going to stay on a while. It's great for that. I'll be using it to seal the fuel pump rod guide rod when I put that in. Okay. And then I'm just going to put a light touch here. Some may argue that that's not necessary, but why not keep oil directing through the places it should go? And in this case, it should go around the bearing and not have the opportunity to take an easier way out. So I'm putting just a light coat, not on the surface that the cam rides, but on the mating surface between the two halves. Okay, so that step is done. I'm going to rinse and repeat on the other half of the case, but I'm going to turn the camera off for that. There's no reason to show that. I'll be back in a minute. I've done the other half now. One thing I wanted to note, I did put a very, very light coat of the aviation sealer on these internal mating surfaces, but I did not put any on these on the other half of the case. I also did not go all the way to the edge of the bearings on the other half of the case because I don't want to risk squish blocking any of those oil galleys. So on the internal here, I was very careful to stay back about 1/4 of an inch or so, but I did want to seal around those studs. And so that work was done. But in terms of the cam, that little light coat there is all that's going to exist for the cam. I just don't want to have any squish become a problem. I have liberally applied, well, not liberally, but it is thicker on the other half of the case than this one. I did not want to have a bunch of stuff dripping, but I also over the years, I've just realized that applying things to both surfaces is great insurance to make sure that you don't accidentally have a dry spot somewhere. I've learned that in wood shop years ago when gluing up furniture, and so I've just kept that discipline. Next up is going to be this little plug. So I'm going to pivot the camera, and then we're going to discuss that. All right, so this little cam plug, I'm just going to gently apply a thin layer. I do not want this to be too thick and risk not seating correctly. So I'm just putting a thin layer around the edge, just enough to seal it off. I say thin, and then I got a big old glob there. I will fix that. Just gonna kind of smooth it off a little bit there and there. You don't want this thing leaking, so it's a good idea to put something on it. And then it just goes in with the hollow side facing the cam. There we go. That should make a nice seal. Yep, all the way around. All right, next is the other half. I've tilted the engine a little bit. I don't want my lifters falling out all over the place, so what I have done is tilted enough where I don't have to be completely straight up in the air. I am lubricating the cam lobes. A little bit on the journal. Now I'm gonna come over here real quick off camera and just put put some assembly lube where the cam rides in the case and those journals. Okay. And I'm going to put a little bit, here, I'll just turn it. I'm going to put a little bit on this bearing surface right here. And I put a little bit down on the crank around that bearing on the journal, just to be safe. We are in super shape here. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply. I did this on the other half. I actually pulled it apart and did this off camera. I'm going to apply just a little bit of the gasket maker in here. I don't want to use so much that I interfere with the case mating surfaces a whole lot, so I want to be careful and mindful of that. But I do want it to seal well. I don't want to go through all this effort and have it leak at that point. There we go. There we go. Be a little neater than what I was initially. Okay. All right, we're going to come back around over here. We're going to introduce the two case halves together. Helps when you line the right holes up. We're going to direct those inside. It's one of those times in life where having a third hand would be not only a cool party trick, but really useful. Okay. Okay. Before I go any further, okay. I had a lifter drop, but it did drop directly onto the cam, so I'm okay there. Pop it a couple of times, get those two together. Actually going to use a bigger hammer. That's a pretty snug fit. Okay. All right. Hopefully I got all that. Next step is to start putting on all the bolts and nuts. First, we got to start, per the Bentley manual, with that number 8, or that M8 stud right there. You tighten that one, then you do all the 12s, then you do all the 8s. And the torque spec for that is as follows, per the Bentley manual: 24 to 26 foot-pound on the M12s, and M8 gets 14 foot-pounds. So what's going to happen is I'm going to tighten that guy down by hand, and then I'm going to torque it to 14. Then I'm going to reset and put my torque wrench on the proper amount for those, probably go on the high end and do 26. And then I'll come back and recheck that at the end. Now, one thing I like to do, that there was a point in time where the newer cases received sealing washers that were, I think they were actually relief cut into the case at the bottom where the stud is. This era did not get that. So one thing I like to do, just to be double safe, is to put a little bit of thread sealer around the bottom of those studs. I had a mechanic about 20 years teach me to do that on my intake bolts, and I've just always taken the opportunity to be consistent with that. So what I'll do is shake, because obviously that's too watery. This is kind of like it's like a paste, it just had separated without use. And that paste is just going to go right around. What I'm going to do is put that on, and then I'm going to spin the washer to distribute that around. Unless I change my mind and use the tip of the screwdriver. This is just a little bit of insurance to make sure that nothing leaks out. Nothing's really got to leak out of these up here, but the lower ones for certain could be at risk for that. All right, so I did change my mind. I am going to run it around the edge of those threads, like so. What'll happen is once that washer drops on and then I put the nut on, it's going to force any of this down into that crack that can go there. And the rest will just squirt out around the bottom and be wiped off. No harm, no foul. Alright, so I got my bag of nuts and bolts and washers. I marked it case when I took this thing apart so I didn't have to wonder what went where later. Sometimes this hardware starts to blend together. So these just drop in like that. There's a similar washer that holds the head on. Nice thick washer like that. This will do a nice job sealing that from any seepage. And I'm sure someone's going to be a naysayer, but this thing held together for a few thousand miles and not a single one of these was loose. And it was over a couple year time span, so. All right. I'm gonna pause and get all these in place, but you get the idea. Okay, I went around and put all the washers and nuts on. Now what I'm going to do is just real quick, I say real quick, nothing ever happens quickly in here, but I'm going to go around and I'm going to run in just enough to kind of get everything where it needs to be, not tight, just down. All right. All right. The goal here was to just run all these down, try to get the two halves closer together. I think I achieved that. Let me pause and grab my, well, I won't have to because there's a 17 right there. So I've got my torque wrench here set to 15. And we're starting with the M8 that's nearest the stud of cylinder 1. And there we go. That one's set. Now we're going to do all of the other head bolts here. Case bolts. Similarly, let me pause and get that set up. All right, I've got the next one set. Because of my extension, I'm going to go with 28 foot-pounds instead of 26 on these. So what we're going to do is start in the middle, just like a head, work our way out. Okay. Crisscross, work our way to the outside. Yep, should have done this one. Then I'm gonna go around, just check them all. Okay. Now it's just a matter of going around and doing all the rest of them. So I'll spare you that.